No, this isn't the Seat Ateca. Well, it clearly is, but it isn't. Is it? It says Seat there. So, here's the deal. Seat used to use the word Cupra to denote a hot version of one of its cars in its range, the Leon Cupra hot hatch, for example. But now, Seat has launched Cupra as its own performance sub-brand, the Cupra Ateca being the first model in that performance sub-brand range. So it's a new hot SUV, but that's not the biggest news here because performance sub-brands and hot SUVs have been a thing for ages. The big news here is that this 300 horsepower SUV can be yours for under £40,000. But what does that price tag get you? So, to put things in perspective, the Cupra Ateca uses the same 2-litre 300 horsepower petrol engine, same all-wheel drive system, and same 7-speed DSG automatic gearbox as the Volkswagen Golf R hot hatch. And that makes for a 0 to 62 miles per hour sprint time of just 5.2 seconds, which, by the way, is only 0.6 seconds slower than the Golf R, on paper anyway. And I tell you what, it does feel fast. I mean, acceleration's not as urgent as what you'd expect in a hot hatch, mainly because you are sat significantly higher in the Cupra Ateca, but it can move when it wants to. So much so you might find yourself just creeping above the speed limit without realising, and that slightly tamed, unassuming character sums up the Cupra Ateca quite well, actually. There's certainly a duality to its appeal. And to be honest, the best way to sum up the Cupra Ateca is with two slightly different caps on. Well, the ride doesn't feel hot hatch firm, although it is clearly firmer than a standard Ateca. I mean, usually with a sporty derivative, you want the ride to be breaking your back and knocking your fillings out. The payoff, of course, being enhanced cornering. And in fact, because the Ateca does sit higher than a hot hatch, overall it does lean a bit more in the corners. And when it comes to the different driving modes available, although they do offer a bit of variety in terms of ride and steering setup, they don't drastically change the way the Cupra Ateca drives, really. In Cupra mode, it could do with a bit more urgency and poke when it comes to the throttle response, but still, the steering is accurate, grip when cornering is excellent, and okay, it might not corner quite as flat as a hot hatch, but there's no denying that when driven right, the Cupra Ateca does feel very sporty. One thing I will say is that the engine note could do with a bit more, I don't know, what's the word? Arrogance. The ride is really compliant all round, although it is a bit jittery in Cupra mode, but you can choose the individual drive mode and have the light steering and comfy ride, as well as the nippy throttle response to help you get out of junctions quicker. But overall, comfort's really good, visibility's good as well, and unless you put your foot down, it's very easy to drive along and cruise along calmly. As you can see, there are clearly two different sides to the Cupra Ateca. It almost feels like a standard Ateca with a rather substantial sport mode fitted. Of course, the first arguments would usually be, oh, but you're spending loads of extra money for that added sportiness. Well, you're not really. I mean, this test car costs £36,700, and for that, you do get a car that is clearly capable of sprinting and cornering like a sports car when you're on a B road, and then cruising sensibly on the motorway when you're not. I mean, just tweaking the steering wheel on this, you can feel the character completely change. It's almost like it wakes up and puts its joggers on. And speaking of cruising on the motorway, as this is a 2-litre petrol, fuel economy is a bit all over the place. For example, if you leave it in Cupra mode and throw in a bit of enthusiasm every once in a while, then you can expect anything from 20 to 25 miles per gallon. However, on the flip side, if you leave it in comfort mode and drive sensibly and don't go crazy with the throttle, then 35 to 40 miles per gallon is achievable. And with CO2 of 168 grams per kilometre, you're looking at a 37% BIK tax bracket for 2019 and 2020. So what does the Cupra Flare get you in here? Well, it's a similar story really. Nothing feels outwardly different about this Ateca. Well, except for the copper badge, copper stitching on the steering wheel and these part leather, part Alcantara seats. Apart from that, it feels very familiar in here, which is to say the layout's very easy to understand. Quality is, well, it's pretty solid all round, and there are loads of convenient cubbies dotted around. kit is impressive too, with all Cupra Atecas getting this 9.2-inch touchscreen with sat-nav, DAB radio, Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, and an around view monitor with sensors to help when parking. You also get this 10.2-inch Audi-esque screen behind the steering wheel, and between these screens there's loads of cool, useful and convenient features to play around with. Some features more useful than others, but nonetheless they are quite entertaining and do enhance the driving experience. Now, the different trim levels available in the Cupra Ateca can get a bit confusing because they're more like option packs. So you've got the standard model, which we've got, then you've got design, then you've got comfort and sound, but you can combine design and comfort and sound to create the flagship model. Anyway, all you really need to know there is that the main additions of those other trims include the likes of copper alloys, Brembo brakes, heated front seats, and a Beats audio system. Now, as is the case with most small SUVs, legroom in the Cupra Ateca is about on par with a hatchback. But its real advantage over a hatch is when it comes to the added headroom. As you can see, I have plenty here. Now, moving around back here is pretty easy to do. I mean, yes, you have a transmission tunnel here, but it's quite easy to climb over, and footwell space is generous on either side. And one very small detail that I really like is this little net you have here where you can put your phone while it's charging. I always like little things like that. The boot offers a familiar setup too, being no nonsense with a square layout that allows you to push things right into the corner, although when the seats are folded you do get a bit of a hump between the back seats and the boot. There is slightly less storage space in here when compared to a Seat Ateca, because the Cupra's standard all-wheel drive system eats up a bit of space. But regardless, there's still loads of space back here, and certainly enough for a few large suitcases. So, what is our verdict on the Cupra Ateca? Well, let's be honest, it probably wasn't the most obvious way to launch a new performance sub-brand, and at times you do question whether it's sporty at all. And I know I mentioned the Golf R earlier, but to me, the Golf R and the Cupra Ateca are aimed at a similar clientele. It's aimed at those who want the best of both worlds. You choose a Golf R or a Cupra Ateca because you want the option to be covert, as opposed to looking like you're trying too hard. Okay, so the Cupra Ateca's subdued style might be a turn-off for some people, but on the flip side, it could be a turn-on for others, so to speak.